Welcome back to Highly Respected's Holiday Edition. I'm your host, Scott Greer, and today we're going to have an incredible Highly Respected for you guys today. So I debated whether we were going to take Memorial Day off, but the fact is that I took off a Monday earlier this month. Man, I had to make it up for having this on a Monday on Memorial Day. And Mondays just work better, but usually for the real holidays, the major holidays, July 4th, Christmas, Labor Day, the ones that usually fall on Mondays or sometimes fall on Mondays will generally not have a podcast on the day. For the holidays that don't really matter or that is not as important, Veterans Day, Columbus Day. Columbus Day is important, but it's generally most Americans take the days of Labor Day, Memorial Day, July 4th, Christmas, etc. off. But they don't take off days of Columbus Day, Veterans Day, President's Day. And, of course, we will never take Juneteenth and Martin Luther King off. So we just want to make those policies. But sometimes I feel like I owe it to the listeners to have an episode on Monday for the fact that I wrongfully and denied you guys an episode on a Monday a few weeks ago. So we're going to have this episode today. It'll be a short one. Watch me say it's going to be a short one, and then it turns into an hour and 30 minutes. I think it'll be a short one based on the topic. And the topic is obvious because it's got to be about the Republican presidential primary that's going on, because there were two candidates announced last week. Obviously, the one who received the most attention was Ron DeSantis, but also Tim Scott announced last week. So there's a lot to discuss on that. And we're obviously going to first discuss Ron DeSantis and his campaign for Highly Respected's first topic. So DeSantis finally jumped in. Everyone knew this was happening, even though some people, particularly shills, were like, he's not even running. And now he's finally running and he's jumped in. And some of these topics a lot of people went over last week, but I want to give my own take. And even I wrote an article about this, but I want to expand on these takes because there's only so much space you get in a 1,000-word column. But here you get a little bit more space to discuss this. And his launch was really bad. I don't think launches are that important, but they do set the tone for the rest of the campaign. I mean, just imagine Trump's launch not going well or not getting much attention, or the media being like, this is weird. Trump's launch in 2015 was a legendary one. I mean, him coming down the escalator, him railing against illegal alien criminals and drug dealers and rapists, that was a news topic for the rest of the month. And people remember that to this day, his announcement speech. A lot of times, most of the time, people don't remember these announcements. I'm probably one of the few people who remembers that Biden announced with this video in 2019 for his 2020 bid about Charlottesville, and Charlottesville was like the centerpiece. And now just a few weeks ago, and for 2024, he centered it around January 6th. These things don't factor in that much. But DeSantis was wanting to make a big splash and differentiate himself from the rest of the pack by having a Twitter space. And we all know the problems with the Twitter space. It was dead silence, dead air for a lot of the 20 minutes. They had to end the space and go and have David Sachs host it rather than Elon Musk, because there's too many people in there, and the governor couldn't even talk. And then when the governor talked, or Florida governor talked, DeSantis, it wasn't really inspiring. I talked about this in my article, but the whole announcement was more like a think tank podcast episode, a very boring one, because Heritage, AEI, Brookings Institute, they all have these podcasts that no one listens to, and it'll be like, "Hi, I'm Joe Dirtbag, douchebag, expert in trade policy. I'm here with another dude who talks about trade policy, and we're gonna drone on for an hour and get 100 views on this podcast." And that's it. And people love doing these podcasts that no one listens to. Maybe people could even say about Highly Respected, but we know that everyone listens to Highly Respected, is that YouTube is throttling my views, obviously. But so this is what's happening with the podcast. And the thing is, it's the star of the podcast was not DeSantis. I mean, we're at Twitter space, but that's obviously a podcast. The star of the space was not DeSantis. DeSantis resembled a producer. If you ever listen to these podcasts, particularly the big ones, they're like, "Hey, producer, what are your thoughts?" And he'll sometimes chime in, but he's not really the star attraction of the show. And that's how DeSantis felt, because he really spoke probably the least amount of time. Is that David Sachs and Elon talked the most, and all the guests that would appear would talk about how much they love Elon. I mean, Thomas Massey got up and he's like, "Oh, Elon, I was one of the first people to buy a Tesla. I love all your products. I would buy this product if my house was set up for it. I just think you're so great. Thank you for buying Twitter." And then he's like, "Okay, DeSantis, I've got this question." And it's like everyone did that. They're like, "Oh, I love you, Elon. You're so great for doing this. Thank you for buying Twitter." Steve Deese also did that. And there was like these errors too with Twitter Spaces, because like people couldn't jump on. Like Steve Deese had that problem, like, "Steve, are you there? Steve, and it's like your voice is muted, and then they just have these funny errors that, and like, everyone in political media is listening to this, and this sounds just like a shit show. And Elon was a star, and and everyone was upstaging him too. DeSantis, it's like everyone forgot that, like, oh, this is the DeSantis space, because these guests who would come on, who are handpicked guests, who are like huge DeSantis supporters, who are all endorsing him: Chris Rufo, Thomas Massey, some other people, Steve Deese. I forget some of the other people who were involved. Those are the three I remember. There's like a doctor who's involved in COVID stuff, who was on there. I think it's the Indian guy, but it may be somebody else. And they were all like praising Elon and spending this whole time with Elon. And then David Sachs and Elon are just talking about random topics like ESG and DEI. And then DeSantis would just have to jump in. And he's like, "Yeah, in Florida, we're trying to deal with this right now. And I really don't like this in Florida." And his opening speech that he did, they're like, "All right, DeSantis, we finally got this set up. Governor, make your speech." And he's like, "Hello, I'm running for president, and decline is a choice, and we're not gonna do that. We see crime taking over our cities. We've got a border problem, and I don't like this, and that's why I'm running for running for president." And it was like a voicemail that everyone had been propped up for, and it's like this automated voicemail that you got. There's like no enthusiasm to it, and then DeSantis's people who are just so enthralled with him. I don't know what there's to be. I mean, I guess with the record or the idea of DeSantis, they're so enthralled with him. The DeSantis War Room shared this video, or this clip of his voicemail, and the video mostly features Elon Musk dancing by Teslas, in front of Teslas. And, the whole speech is about the American comeback. We're going to make America not great again, because that's not my slogan. We're going to make America come back again. And so he's giving this speech, and the whole time it's mostly Elon clips. No music whatsoever. I mean, the rousing music would have been a problem, and he just had that. But they even had this issue with the preview for the campaign, because there's like a preview ad like released a day or two before he was going to announce, and the preview ad had a voiceover that wasn't even his voice, and nobody knew whose voice it was. Some people said it was like Martin Luther King. It wasn't Martin Luther King, but it was like talking about the state of the nation or something. And the voiceover was not his. And it's like, who is this voiceover? And it's like the people don't automatically recognize this. And then the full ad had his voice, and it was far less inspiring to listen to. And it's the same with the space. It's like the space, he gave the voicemail, automated voicemail, why he's running for president. Not very exciting. And then the rest of the time, everyone was talking about how much they love Elon. And then a lot of the discussion topics were things that like the average American would just not know about. Like a lot of the liberal media was pointing this out. Like it was really in the weeds of stuff that people who are, hardcore consumers of conservative media, really not even hardcore consumers of conservative media, but hardcore consumers of conservative Twitter content would know. Like they would be aware of ESG and DEI and like these university policies that he's doing, and like some of the regulations he's going after, that and libel laws. I think they talked about a little bit about libel laws, but a lot of this stuff was like in COVID policies. A lot of this stuff was really in the weeds, a lot of wonkery that the average voter listener would probably not aware of. They're like, what is ESG? They may have awareness of the DEI acronym, but it's Not a direct statement that Trump would talk about. Like Trump would just say like anti-white hatred is bad, or like they're trying to indoctrinate you to hate this country. And he would say in simple statements that people are going to understand, like mass deportation illegals, which he's talking about a lot, which DeSantis isn't really talking about. People understand that. Or his like opening speech that he came down is like they're bringing drugs, they're bringing crime, they're rapists. People understand these. Like there's no need for an acronym here. It's like very direct, very overt, and it's something that is going to get a lot of attention. And here it's like a snooze fest. But it is leaning into this reputation as DeSantis is the extremely online candidate. In fact, he got convinced to do this as a Twitter space where the voters are not on Twitter. The voters are on elsewhere. He would have been much better served if he had done a Fox News town hall where Elon Musk was not the host and stealing the attention, and it's somebody who's in Fox News who's going to do a much better job of not having a bunch of dead air and making sure that no one's like spending most of their time praising the host of the town hall, but instead praising DeSantis. And he'd be actually reaching that base of voters who are voting in a Republican primary, not on Twitter. And a lot of the issues he's talking about are stuff that people discuss a lot on Twitter, but people who are offline, who are the grass touchers, are not as informed of or is not as certain of what they're talking about and is not their major concern. And he's even doing this with a lot of his stuff. He's now, his whole advisors have these lists of grievances against Trump that the majority of people don't remember or don't care about. Now, one thing he's attacking on it, which I think was bad with Trump, was like the First Step Act, which DeSantis would have supported if he had been in Congress. He signed into law Florida's own version of the First Step Act, and he is just as tainted by it as much as Trump. But Trump, he's now campaigning on removing the First Step Act because all of these online surrogates he has, keep harping on it and keep saying that this is like the real thing to hit Trump on. But it's probably not going to land as much because people think that a lot of it is like all coming for the First Step Act. The First Step Act was a problem with crime, but most of the crime problems is coming from local and state authorities refusing to prosecute crime. Like when you look at what New York City is happening, it's not because of the First Step Act. It's because they've eliminated cash bail on a local and state level. It's because these local prosecutors won't prosecute crime. They won't do what they're supposed to do. And it's the same in most of these cities. It's like local and state authorities. And some of this is going on the war on police, which is from a cultural level and the DOJ level. Once the Biden administration got in, DOJ began opening up all these investigations into police departments around the country to try to find racism. So, that's a level on a federal. The Trump administration, to its credit, the Obama administration was doing a lot of these investigations and they ended it and they were being more pro-police. That's why crime was better for most of the Trump administration. But now with Biden in, they're now putting these handcuffs back on police. The First Step Act, crime is an important issue. And maybe it's a way to go to attack Trump from his right. But it's at the same time an extremely online criticism. We're going to know he's really extremely online if he starts criticizing the Platinum Plan, which is what they all talk about, which no one outside the internet remembers the Platinum Plan. The Platinum Plan was also stupid, but it never got enforced. And it was just a way that like a poorly thought out way pitched to black voters that just didn't work. Platinum Plan was going to say, we're going to invest more in black communities. We're going to have Juneteenth. Well, unfortunately, we already have Juneteenth, so I don't know. DeSantis probably won't do this because DeSantis is not going to say, we're going to repeal Juneteenth. He would never say that, and especially with his campaign. He went on his Twitter space, and he was talking about how awesome Florida is for blacks, and we love blacks in Florida. And now in our education, we require a thorough teaching of the history of America's racial discrimination. And you're like, okay, maybe this, I guess that's based, maybe not. And he didn't mention his requirement of Asian American and Pacific Islander studies, a coursework for students. And, that's all going to teach about how America discriminated against Asians and they're so persecuted. We had Chinese Exclusion Act. Oh, this is so bad. And the internment. Oh, no. The poor little Asians, and that's what the point of this course is going to be. And that's what they're now teaching in Florida. And he was the first Florida governor to sign that into law, our first Republican governor to sign that into law. This has been popular in California. This has been popular elsewhere in California and elsewhere. This is a opportunity for them to further advance critical race theory and anti-white racism, and now they're going to be able to do that in Florida with this required course. But if he did go after the Platinum Plan, that would be very extremely online because, once again, the voters aren't aware of this, and it never got into place. It never got put into place. But it's even just extremely online based on what he's focused on. I mean, they are so focused on Twitter. Is that they have, there's the influencer question, which DeSantis people have very lack of self-awareness, that they believe that every person who supports Trump on Twitter must be getting paid for, which is projection on their own part because all these people tweet nonstop DeSantis anti-Trump content all the time. Like, I tweet a lot of pro-Trump content, but I try not to make it the anti-DeSantis pro-Trump content the majority of my content. I try to have other topics, try to do some magic posting and some other things to, make sure it's not just a one-note posting. But these guys, that's all they post about. And they always they're now talking about we need to get Elon to ban pay to play influencers. We need to have a badge to say that you're an influencer or on behalf of a campaign. And this would affect the DeSantis people. They all try to want to portray themselves as independent. Even if they're not getting paid, they're clearly getting coordinated by people within DeSantis campaign, Christina Pichal and others, to tweet out certain talking points because they'll all have these certain talking points. They all are a lot of people are displaying Oppo research that was clearly collected by DeSantis campaign. Others are just tweeting out some random video interview of DeSantis where he's like, "This is awesome. DeSantis just destroyed Trump." And they tweet that nonstop. And, there's Trump people who do that, but generally they're formally associated with the campaign. There's Caroline Leavitt, Liz Harrington, Alex Bruzewitz, those guys, it's clear that they're working for the Trump campaign. And even, I think in Harrington and Leavitt's case, they announced that they're working for Trump campaign. And they'll post those type of clips. Now, for DeSantis influencers, it'll be somebody who's a ostensibly independent pundit, conservative thinker, working at Red State or Town Hall or Chronicles. And they'll be posting they're a press spokesman for DeSantis. Now, if they were a press spokesman for DeSantis, or if they clarified that, then that would be one thing. But they're not clarifying that. They're trying to pretend that they're a serious political pundit and that they've somehow turned into a DeSantis flag. And it's very overt. This is, I remember the 2016 campaign. I was working at the Daily Call at the time. There was a lot of hostility towards Trump. But even these pundits were not going into being full-on campaign surrogates for Rubio or Cruz up until the very end. Once the primary started, there were people who were just being openly Rubio or Cruz surrogates. Some of these people disclosed it. I remember when Rick Wilson became, formally started working for Rubio, it was announced that he was working for Rubio. But all these people are just oh, no, I'm just an independent thinker, and I've decided to make all my content resemble DeSantis campaign propaganda. And it's I think that's a little stupid. And all these people are very much projecting when they're saying, only Trump people do this. If you post anything pro-Trump, you have to be getting paid for it. I'm clearly not. And also, unlike these DeSantis people, I'm willing to criticize Trump or say things that are not good. I don't agree with the First Step Plan. I didn't think the Platinum Plan was stupid. I think that Trump, and I even did a podcast, in December where I was criticizing a lot of what the Trump campaign was doing at that time. They announced that they were running for president, and it didn't seem like they were running for president. I initially criticized the NFTs, but I then found that they were really funny, so I've stopped criticizing them. But I'm willing to criticize Trump if Trump does something stupid. None of these people are willing to criticize DeSantis on anything, even if there's the hate speech law he signed into law. That where it's going to criminalize people for hate leafleting and hate and spreading hate on college campuses, which it's just had an effect because they just arrested the leader of the Goyim Defense League, which once again, Goyim have to, say Goyim Defense League is really stupid. I don't think their activism is effective at all. It's just IRL trolling. It's just like a shock jock group. It's something more akin to Jackass, the TV show. Then that's a millennial reference. Gen Zers may not be aware of that, but it's more akin to Jackass than it is to real political activism. But he got arrested for littering, the hate littering comment. And, this is what the DeSantis people want. And some of these DeSantis surrogates, some of the things they post on Twitter, somebody dropped that off on someone's doorstep or mailbox, that person could get arrested for what they've tweeted before. So, but none of them are willing to criticize it, and all of them came and strongly supported that. That would be akin to me coming out and being like, the Platinum Plan was awesome. I would never say that. I would openly criticize it, and because I have that independence of freedom as a free thinker, as a political commentator, I still have that independence to see if Trump ever does something stupid, I can criticize him. None of these DeSantis people who, write for publications, present themselves as just, impartial conservative commentators are willing to do that. So they've effectively just become flags for the DeSantis campaign. And that was not happening in 2016, at least at this early of a stage. Like, it would have been very weird for people several red state and town hall writers and all these people just become openly flags for Cruz, and all their content and what they're talking about is entirely centered around bashing Trump. Well, a lot of them were doing that with bashing Trump, but not necessarily advocating for one candidate. So the flackery has taken over Twitter, and it's probably going to make Twitter an unbearable experience. It's not all DeSantis, but it is mostly DeSantis. And these people just have these talking points that they just repeat and share all and all again. And there's far more of the DeSantoids than there are of Trump supporters, or at least among the influential. And I would have said check marks, but they got rid of the check marks. So it would have been the former blue checks, who are now sharing this, like the big influencers. It's mostly a DeSantis phenomenon. And it's like, you're going to have several months of just people like, Trump said this and Trump said that. And DeSantis is so awesome. Check out this clip of him being like, when I see Trump, he pushed the First Step Act. And, I don't find that, crime, that's the way you treat criminals. In Florida, we don't, we put criminals in jail. We don't release them. And that's going to be the type of content we're going to see. Well, we'll have more opportunities for the DeSantis impersonation. I did think about having just interviewing DeSantis on the podcast, but I thought that would be a little bit too much. We'll just sprinkle in more DeSantis impersonations throughout here. But yeah, that's going to be the content, and it's makes for just bad content when everything is just designed to help one presidential campaign, and it's all of Twitter. And a lot of these guys, they may say that they're not being paid influencers. They may not be being paid. Maybe they're just being paid by, in access. But if campaign people are coordinating and telling you what to tweet all the time, and most of your tweets are done in the service of a presidential campaign, you're effectively a surrogate. You're effectively a flack for them. But this is not acknowledged by you, and you're just saying, oh, I'm just an independent thinker. That's not the case. But it's going to make Twitter experience not so great of it. I was already getting tired of this by the next day, and people are just it's just going nuclear. Gavin Wax got fired from his job because Babylon Bee didn't like him attacking DeSantis. And then the DeSantis people were like, oh, this is awesome, he got fired. But by the way, they're threatening our jobs. It's whose job is being threatened by being a DeSantis supporter? No one's job is being threatened. And then they're like, oh, it's so hard being a DeSantis supporter online. It's everyone, this means you're going to get columns, and you're going to get in major conservative publications. You're going to get, Fox News may interview you and all these things. There's more incentive to be a DeSantis supporter than a Trump supporter online. But people just exist in a fantasy world with this. But it's going to make for really bad content, unfortunately. But as to repeat some points from the article I made, is that ultimately, DeSantis is showing himself for his problems. Like, people love this idea of DeSantis. They imagine that this is the guy who's going to be out there, who's just going to be destroying the left, all the time. He can destroy Trump. He's just so inspiring and powerful. And his speeches are awesome. And he's been relying on conservative media to pump him up, to boost him, and to create this image around him that is not connected to reality. And his whole campaign strategy is to get Iowa voters to get to know him. Is that he's going to go around to meet and greets and do retail politics and these speeches. This is pretty much his weakest suit. This is his weakest, there is a huge weakness here. The more people get to know DeSantis, the more they're going to find him a weirdo who just lacks personal skills. And all these videos of him just like going in, being like, there's like the awkward one of him going into a bar. He's like, oh, hey, I'm here. Hi, what's your name? And he's like, my name's Bob. Okay. And then he goes to the next person. There's also the guy who's like a state senator who drove several hours to meet him in Iowa. And the guy's like, oh, I drove several hours to meet you. And he's like, oh, that's a long drive. Well, nice to meet you. And then he moves around and goes around to talk to other people. Like, he just doesn't understand people. He lacks those skills. And when people go out to Iowa, because a lot of candidates have done this, a lot of candidates lacking money and lacking a lot of the media notoriety just camp out in Iowa and think that their personality is going to win them. And sometimes this works. Like Mike Huckabee, this helped him out a lot in 2008. But Mike Huckabee knows how to meet those like kind of rural middle Americans. Like, he's just one of them. He's like, hi, I'm Mike Huckabee. He's like got that preacher vibe. He knows how to relate to these people. Jimmy Carter did this back in the 70s. Several people have done this, and they're able to win them over through, just the fact that, like, hey, I like that guy. He had a nice long conversation with me. He gave a terrific speech. I like this guy. But DeSantis is so scripted, so robotic. He doesn't give good speeches. He doesn't know how to talk to people. He's not even the star presence when he enters a restaurant or a bar. Like, you can notice this when he goes in. Like, there is the question of presence, which is just something you have or don't have. Trump absolutely has that. When he walks into some place, all eyes are him. All the attention is on him. Like, think about like when he was in East Palestine. It's East Palestine, not East Palestine, for whatever reason. And like, he walked into McDonald's, and like the entire McDonald's was all centered on him. Nobody else was having any conversations. All of it was just centered on Trump. And Trump had them in the palm of his hand. Like, they were excited to see Trump and be in his presence. That magnetism is there. And that's like the same whenever he goes. Another example is like Tucker Carlson. Whenever he enters a room, all eyes are on him. He has that magnetism, that, he has that presence. DeSantis does not have that presence. All these video clips, like, even aside his like lackluster personal skills, he is not the star of attention. He is not the center of attention when he goes into it. It's like, he's just a random person there. When he entered that bar into New Hampshire, like, there was like an awkward thing. It's like, oh, here he is. But like, people were just carrying on conversations. It was like very awkward of him going in there. If Trump had gone in there, there'd been like cheers and like people like beaming. They're like, it's Trump. And like that, like, center of gravity would be all centered around him. And that guy introducing himself would have been just like, wow, I'm in the presence of Trump. Because he has that charisma. He has that presence. That's just something you have or don't have. And DeSantis doesn't have that. He's just like another person. The fact is, it's like, to return to a point, is like, in that Twitter space, he wasn't even the star of it. Like, if Thomas Massey is upstaging you in your own presidential announcement, you've got problems. And even that was like a problem that I pointed out last year, is when he had the hurricane. And, he is also an asshole to people with, to mention something else aside, is like that, some of the congressmen who've endorsed Trump were really pissed off about the hurricane. They're like, yeah, my district got devastated. I'd like to give a speech. And he's like, you're not giving a speech. It's all on me. And so all the attention had to be on him. But when Biden showed up, all the attention was on Biden. Like, Biden just blew him out of the fucking water. Like, even when DeSantis was giving his boring speech, Biden was in the background. It was the center of attention. He was like talking with people. He was like, having a good time in the background. All the attention was on him because he knows he has more charisma. And there's all these photos of him, like all these people like excited to meet Biden, even though they're prior Trump supporters, like, oh, it's the president. And the president's there and doing retail politics. And DeSantis is by him doing the Virgin Wall. He does not have that presence. And like his whole campaign strategy is convincing these middle American voters out in Iowa that he's a normal person and very personable and like a great speaker and anything. This is not him. He's wholly dependent on conservative media. He would needs to move the primary to Washington, D.C. or Virginia in order to have, or even Maryland, to have a chance in the primary, because that's where his support base is, along with Florida. But those aren't the places where he's at. I mean, he is entirely dependent on the media, conservative media, to make him a star and make him this powerful political figure that a lot of conservatives want to imagine him as. But once they meet him in person, they're going to get it. There's like this guy, well, I like his record, but he's just such a strange person. And then like Trump comes in, it's like Chad versus Virgin meme. Like he's just going to be the star of the show and no one can compete against that. Even what DeSantis is running on isn't really the concerns of like ordinary offline voters. It is very online voters. Like he's going to go up in Iowa and talk about Bud Light and Target, which, some people may care about that, but this is very much like the online conservative media. That's what they care about. But in like Iowa, they want to hear about ethanol subsidies and like farm stuff and like those type of policies. Which it's like very boring stuff, but all DeSantis is like, DeSantis surrogates, they keep saying like Trump won't name the Target, Trump won't name the Bud Light. And it's like, that's not what's going to be the deciding issues in this Republican primary. It's going to be the same topics that it always is. You could say hitting the First Step Act, but then explaining how like the First Step Act is the worst thing, but the Florida First Step Act is not that bad. It is great, and we're not rescinding it. Or just talking about other things. But like crime, immigration, foreign policy, economy are going to be the main concerns. And DeSantis is rather going to want to talk about the faux culture war stuff to these Iowa voters and his robotic voice and poor personal skills. And this is just not going to work. Because like the more voters get to know DeSantis, the less likely they're going to want to vote for him. And that's a problem that's always been for a lot of presidential candidates, is that he's a media hype creation. And so he has no chance against Trump. No chance against Trump unless for some reason everyone else dropped out and he began learning social skills to make him, people like him, which I don't think is going to happen. All these candidates are getting in the race under the assumption that Trump will not remain around for the primaries, is that his legal problems will be so bad that he'll have to drop out, and that will allow the rest of the race to carry forward. I don't think even DeSantis would win in that scenario. For one, Trump would still hate him, would still be attacking him. He has a real personal vendetta against DeSantis. And when Trump has a personal vendetta against someone of that magnitude, he does not forgive. And he really hates DeSantis. And DeSantis, even if he somehow won the nomination, even without Trump, I think his chances are low in that regard. Trump may not support the Republican nominee. And so his chances in a general election would be bad without that support. His also main problem, and these apply to the general election, is like complete, like his personality is like complete lack of charisma, his complete reliance on these online surrogates to force him to talk about extremely online issues and to lean into these things. That's what they want him, that's not what resonates with Americans, and he just doesn't have the presence and charisma to sell the people on this. Like, to be a successful American politician, you have to be a good salesman, and he is not a good salesman. Conservative media is a good pitch man for him, but he himself is not a good pitch man for himself. So the Trump hostility and his complete lack of personality are going to be hindrances even when Trump is for some reason no longer in the race. And that's something he has to deal with. Additionally, DeSantis is going to hurt himself in the primary by attacking Trump. I mean, he has to attack Trump, but the problem is like the majority of Republican voters have a strong emotional attachment to Trump and feel that any attacks on him are unwarranted and attacks are on them themselves. And so when DeSantis, and he's like, well, I'm attacking him from the right. Cruz tried to do that in 2016 too, and that did not work out for him. It doesn't, and it only works out on Twitter from attacking Trump from the right. Everyone else thinks he's the most right-wing person is. There is a lot of fair criticism to make of Trump from the right, but it only really works in the world of political commentary and Twitter. It does not work in like presidential campaign politics for Republican Party. The non-Trump, like there is not a really good lane for DeSantis, which he wants to have like the anti-Trump, but personally but pro-Trump policy, which there's not a lot of real-life Americans in that. There's a lot of people on Twitter like that, but Twitter is not real life. The non-Trump lane is like we also want to moderate all those issues. We want to just move back to the business first priorities of the previous Republican Party, of the pre-Trump era, and a lot of people are trying to do that, like Tim Scott, Nikki Haley, likely Glenn Youngkin is now getting in. All these people are getting in, which is another sign of DeSantis' weakness. Is that the North Dakota governor, I forget his name, not important, but all these people think they can jump in because they're seeing how like weird DeSantis is, how all these donors are just like, I don't think he has what it takes to win, and they're just like, it's time for me to jump in. And DeSantis's lane just does not really exist in the real world. It exists online, but a lot of like support. I mean, a lot of the support of there, those people who have like issues with Trump, but they still have this strong attachment to Trump and they do not like criticism of him. And if DeSantis is going to engage in this kind of passive aggressive or histrionic passive aggressive and histrionic are a little bit different, but histrionic criticism that his online surrogates make on an hourly basis, that's going to alienate Republican voters from him. But he's going to engage in that because he's more concerned with what people are saying on Twitter and in conservative media than what actual voters care about and are saying. Now moving to a little bit brief comments on Tim Scott. I've always been, insistent that Tim Scott is a serious problem. If Trump is no longer in the race, he has a lot of establishment support, a lot of donors like him. He appears able to talk to people, which now that's not a lot of these candidates have that that trait like DeSantis. I actually have to add one more thing with DeSantis. It is so funny that all these people are like, you don't need to know how to talk to people. You don't need charisma. Like, people just vote on policy. It's like, that's absolutely not true. It's like every presidential election is based on personality and charisma. It's like, it's needed there. The only two people who've really succeeded who didn't have that type of charisma are George H.W. Bush and Hillary Clinton. But George H.W. Bush ran on as the establishment candidate with highly qualified, like he had worked in all these important positions in government, war hero, and he's a WASP patrician, and people understood he'd be a little bit aloof because he was not an ordinary American. He didn't try to hide that. And Hillary Clinton was, had the Clinton brand with her, her very charismatic husband, and she was running in a Democratic Party where there's, being a bitchy boss woman is not as much of a detraction from you as it would be in the Republican Party. Republican Party has different mind, but they're just like saying like, you don't need charisma, you don't need personality. And his whole strategy is to win over ordinary Iowa voters through these meet and greets. And it's like, if you don't have a personality, if you don't have charisma, how the hell are you going to convince them to vote for you? And it's like, and he just like, the sanctimonious actually works because it's just like a sanctimonious record. And like ordinary people are like, yeah, he is kind of sanctimonious because he's like, my record, I've done so many good things and I'm doing this. And it's like a very sanctimonious, like my record says I deserve to be president more than this. And like for a lot of Iowa voters, they don't want to hear about like how he's like hurt Disney in Florida. Like they just don't give a shit about that. That's not one of their most important issues. They want somebody that can connect with them and inspire them to vote for that person. And without that conservative media safe space that he's been thriving in, he's going to lose those voters. So just wanted to get that out there. But back to Scott. If Trump did drop out, Scott would be a serious threat to the nomination. And Scott would be the worst person to become the nominee. I don't think Nikki Haley has a shot. She's not getting much donor support, not much establishment support. I think she's now just trying to move on to, auditioning to be vice president for someone. That wouldn't work for Tim Scott because they're both from the same state. They can't be from the same state. Maybe, I don't think Trump doesn't like her. So I don't even know what her strategy is. She's just kind of flailing about, giving speeches where no one's clapping for her and stuff. But Scott has a lot of support. I mean, John Thune, who's the second highest ranking Republican in the Senate, endorsed him. A lot of these senators and Mitch McConnell thinks he's the greatest thing since sliced bread. Like these guys would raise money for him, and donors really like him. And unfortunately for a lot of ordinary conservatives, they love the idea of a base black guy. I mean, there was a lot of support for Herman Cain and Ben Carson, who are just two random black guys who showed up to in presidential races, and they were at brief periods of time front runners. Now imagine an established Republican politician with a ton of donor support and like the establishment framework running his campaign, and that could make for a serious threat. Now, as long as Trump is in the race, he is not a real problem, except for possibly being a VP nominee. But I don't think Trump will pick him because Trump wants somebody who's going to question the 2020 election, and Scott is not going to do that. He's more likely to go with Stefanik or Carrie Lake or Noam, one of the probably a woman rather than maybe even Vivek Ramaswamy. I don't think he'll go with Ramaswamy, but he's more likely to go with those candidates than Scott. But as long as Trump's in the race, we don't have to worry about that. But without him in the race, it's going to be a very different campaign because DeSantis will have hurt himself. DeSantis will have hurt himself by that time, and all these people will jump in, like Youngkin, the guy from North Dakota. Maybe Pompeo will reconsider his decision to not run for president. All these people will be jumping in, and DeSantis will no longer be as the great Trump alternative. He'll just be this governor with a decent record, but a horrible personality, and eventually his star power will fade and they'll go to other candidates. But in a Trump-less primary, we don't really have any good options. Really, the better option, I'd rather vote for Vivek Ramaswamy than DeSantis. I think also Ramaswamy would have a better chance of winning the primary and the general election than DeSantis, simply because Trump likes him and he has a charisma. I don't really like Ramaswamy. I have a lot of reservations about Ramaswamy for obvious reasons. And also, I don't like his stance on immigration. But I don't think DeSantis could even win a general election based solely on his personality and the Trump factor, and the fact that Trump really hates him and will never support him. And that's that's a significant amount of Republican voters that the party will need to win an election. And I don't think he could even convince independents, because they just find this like a weirdo who's wanting to talk about these conservative media fake culture war issues, like whatever new company just hired a drag queen for their ads. Conservative media consumers care about that, but independent voters don't give a shit about that. And that's what he would discuss. Tim Scott, unfortunately, would win over a lot of those people, and even win over a lot of ordinary mainstream Republicans. So he also has a charisma. I mean, he's not that great of a speaker. He's also not good on his feet of giving answers. Like, he gave really bad answers when they asked him about the national abortion ban. He's not good on thinking on his feet in quite of a way, but I do think people, and he also is a bachelor, which I think people still find that weird, and he's like in his late 50s too. So I don't know. I do think he would be a serious candidate without Trump in the field. People underestimate how easily the GOP could revert to its old form without Trump there. It could easily just people move aside from the important identity issues, and they instead replace the identity issues with, Mattel releasing a gender neutral Ken doll. I guarantee you this is going to happen, and this is going to be a major outrage. So be prepared for this. I said it here first, or that may already exist, and they may discover it. They'll replace it with those type of issues that are these shallow, stupid issues that don't really matter. And then they'll have the party, even though they're intellectuals, be like, we need to cancel capitalism. Their party will then focus on how we need to reduce government spending, and we need to allow the free market to do more cool stuff, and they'll just go back to business first principles. But then they'll, treat the conservative media consumers with, well, we're not drinking Bud Light and we're boycotting Target, and that'll be enough to convince these conservative media pundits to stay in the fold or to stay hyping up the people to vote GOP. And they could really do that. And if you look at like a lot of these alternatives who I think have better shots in a Trumpless primary, Youngkin, Scott, I think that's the way that they could be turned back to. And the fact with Tucker off the air, he's no longer at Fox News. You no longer have that voice pushing the Republican Party to question the Ukraine conflict, to take a strong stance against legal mass immigration, and to point out anti-white racism. A lot of that would go away, and a lot of these guys would revert back to form. We can even see this in the debt ceiling fight, which I've said before that I will talk about the debt ceiling fight, but really, I find it incredibly boring. I find it actually really stupid that Republicans are wasting their limited political capital on this fight when we have a full-on invasion at our border. And instead of making the debt ceiling contingent upon getting more secure funding for the border to ensure that we stop having an invasion or to get more immigration enforcement, they're instead reverting back to the Tea Party days and talking about government spending and restricting government spending, but not restricting defense spending. It's a complete caricature of where Republican priorities are. It's like they're wasting their limited political capital with their tiny majority in the House to push for old school Tea Party priorities about shrinking the size of government. And it's not shrinking the size of the military-industrial complex. They actually want to keep that funding. And it's not in giving more funding to secure the border. It's just about all these like spending cuts that no one gives a shit about. And we're going to raise the debt ceiling anyway. But Republicans, wanting to say like we're fighting for something, and they're hyping up conservative media audience to be like we're fighting to the death to ensure we can have more spending cuts to entitlements or to infrastructure projects or whatever. And this is really what Republican voters care about. No, they give a shit about the border. If the fight over the debt ceiling was tied directly to the border invasion, if they were saying that we will only raise this if something is done about the border, I would care about it, and I would be supporting their efforts in fighting against the Biden administration. But that's not, they've sort of added it as like a very secondary concern, but it's not really their main concern. Their concern is government spending, which is just a return to the pre-Trump era. It just doesn't matter, and it's unimportant, and they're going to have to pass the debt ceiling anyway, and they don't have enough of a majority to force the Democrats to make spending cuts. And Democrats know that any, economic conditions that would result from it or the shutdown would then be blamed on Republicans. So, I mean, there's no Trump-esque fight. Like, some people want to portray this as like, the Trumpian populists versus the establishment Republicans. And they did this with McCarthy too, which the McCarthy fight actually turned out to work in their favor. But that was also not like a Trump era fight. This is like a post-Trump fight where in the insurgents against McCarthy and his House Speaker vote were standard Tea Party concerns. There wasn't even that much concern with the border or anything we care about. And even they nominated Byron Donalds, who actually is a strong Trump supporter, so I shouldn't attack him too much. And they're like, this is awesome. We're nominating a black guy to be our House Speaker. This is incredible. And then they all clapped, and it was very much a return to Tea Party days. And it's the same with the debt ceiling fight. This has no Trumpian issues are involved whatsoever. None of the identity issues that we care about are involved. But a lot of people like just automatically side with whatever is called far right by the media and like whatever looks like the hardcore side. And people think that this is what needs to be fought to the death over. But none of these issues matter to the American people. They're going to raise the debt ceiling anyway. They should raise the debt ceiling because they're not going to tie it to the border security. So who gives a shit? You shouldn't care about this because this is how they duped us into caring about pointless bullshit in the pre-Trump days. Don't buy into this stuff. So that's why I don't really talk about that. But the debt ceiling fight and the McCarthy fight both reveal the party can easily return back to the Tea Party days. And without Tucker there to influence a lot of these lawmakers and influence a lot of their most dedicated voters, they can easily go back to that. If Hannity's now back at is supposedly going to be at the 8 o'clock slot. And if he's there, he's just going to stick to the GOP line. I mean, he is a strong Trump supporter, so I will give him that credit. But he is, otherwise, he just sticks to the standard party line. And that's what Fox News will reflect, and that's what talk radio will reflect. And it'll just be like the Trump era never happened, if that is allowed to take place. And that's why I think it's important to support Trump, because if he is taken out of the equation, they will easily revert back to this. But as long as he's the leader of the party, and especially with Tucker Carlson gone, he is able to push the party in an America First, identity-centric way, and that's important to our issues, and that's important to us. So that's it for that topic. I had a few others that I want to talk about, but we've already reached past the 50-minute mark, and I'm trying to have a shorter episode today. And I think a lot of these topics require a lot more of attention. Two of them. One is based on a tweet about America being a utopia for black criminals. I'll probably turn that into an article. The second one is all this talk about an American Franco. I think I'm going to do an IQ supplement on that for later this week. There was some tweets and people discussing that and the turn towards authoritarianism on the right. And the Franco one deserves a lot of attention. That's enough. That's an episode in itself. So I'll definitely turn that into IQ supplement. Utopia from black criminals. That's very apparent, but I'll talk more about that. It's more going to be about the two-tier justice and what happens, because I really want to bring up this case of this guy who got convicted of 10 years for defending himself in Oregon and compare that to another really outrageous case from the San Francisco Bay Area, where these two black criminals shot I think he was like 72-year-old man on camera. It was captured. No denying that they did this, but due to the arguments of appealing that they had a sickle cell crisis, yes, they amended they had a sickle cell crisis and their low IQ, that they shouldn't be held responsible for the murder, and they had a hung jury. The jury couldn't vote to convict, so I think I'll discuss that in an episode. We could do that maybe, and that topic's not going to go away, but I'll leave that to an article. I think it's better to put that in the case. I mean, it's very clear why that's happening. I mean, it's like just, in America right now, black worship, Afrolatry is a state religion, and this is reflected in our criminal justice system. I mean, it's even seen that case in the Lululemon, where these women who called the police on the black looters were the ones fired. And of course, I don't think and this happened in Georgia too. And I'm sure the black looters were never caught or don't really have to face any charges over this. I mean, it's like awesome to be a black criminal now. You get released, no one charges you for anything. If anyone tries to step in your way, they prosecute them and punish them, as Daniel Penny and now these women who worked at a Lululemon learned. So I'll probably discuss that in an article, because that's another topic deserving full attention. I will talk a little bit about another topic that I discussed in last week's IQ Summit, but there was an update on it. That's the LA Dodgers thing that they're doing with the drag queen nun group and the continuing controversy over that. Is the Dodgers have an interesting response to that, is that they're now offering a Christian night in July to offset the Pride night. And people on Twitter were not very enthusiastic about this idea. They responded negatively to it. But I found that the idea that that's their solution to this very interesting, because really, instead of caving fully to the Christian, the devout Christians who are demanding that they eliminate this group or even eliminate the entire night, or push away this group, reject this group from participating, or reject the group from, or the whole night in itself, they're instead like, well, here, we'll have a Christian night. And that's treating Christians as just another identity group in America. Same with blacks, Hispanics, gays, furries, whatever identity group people want to have. Christians are now, the solution to this is like, well, we'll give you your own night. You can be an identity group along with the rest. And I think Christians find this insulting because, first off, they're still the majority of the country, even though that's in decline. It's under 2/3, I think, or it's around 2/3 of the country, but it's continuing to go lower of people who proclaim that they're Christians in the country, which, growing up, not even growing up that long ago, but in the 2000s, it was still in the 80s, but now it's below 70% who claim to be Christian. It's a rapidly changing country, so they're still the majority, and there was once a time where they were the dominant group. Is that if you offended them, you were just not going, that thing was just not going to fly. If you're going to perform music that offended them, a movie offended them, like The Last Temptation of Christ, the Martin Scorsese movie about based on a book about the last temptation of Christ. A lot of Christians found that very offensive, and the movie faced a lot of backlash for that. That's unthinkable to happen today. I mean, just by this nun group, they're seeing a lot of online backlash, but the Dodgers are in a blue area. Their fans probably don't really care that much about this. They're just trying to please everyone. I mean, they're a sports team. They don't really want to offend, one possible consumer base they might have, but they also don't want to offend another group by appeasing them, even though they've already done that with in relation to the gay lobby and Christians. So their solution is just to treat them as another identity group. And maybe that is like a strange future that we may have, where like all these teams still have pride nights and black pride nights and whatever, but then they'll add like a Christian night to satisfy the people who are devout Christians to come to the game, and they'll have like pastors or whoever give speeches and stuff. That could be a preview of what we can see in America's future. It's an interesting solution. I don't think people are really happy with that, because they don't want to be just another identity group. They want to have the country reflect their own values as the majority. But as devout Christians are certainly not a majority anymore. Self-proclaimed Christians are, but like devout Christians are no longer a majority. And with that change, especially on religious attitudes, they will be still there. And it's not, and some people like to say that, like, most of this stuff is driven by anti-Christian or animus towards Christianity, which some of it is, but it's still not as controversial to base your identity around being Christian versus being white. Like, they're never going to have a white pride night. They're never going to have a white identity night. There's never going to, strongly identifying as a white person could jeopardize your employment and other things. In some cases, being a strong Christian can, but there's still a lot of defenses for that and a lot of more social acceptance for it. And the fact that teams will host like a night dedicated to the faithful does show that there's this like identity group status for them. That the problem is the rest of society outside of their specially designated identity zone is not going to reflect their values and virtues, unlike it was in the past. So that's a big change in America. Now on to the Cotton Elite questions. As a reminder, you too can get the power to ask me questions or suggest guests and topics if you sign up for the Cotton Elite option at Highly Respected's Substack, and that's at highlyrespected.substack.com, and make sure to sign up for the IQ supplements while you're there. So this first question, I missed this because I think I had just like a deluge. I had a deluge of questions last week, so I forgot about this one. You have to mark question like in some of the messages you send, so I make sure about that. And if I do miss your question, don't hesitate to remind me in the Highly Respected comments at the Substack, or send me an email. Like, sometimes I apologize if I missed this, but I did miss this last week. I was supposed to do this, but we just had a lot of questions last week, so I didn't get around to it. This question is from Mystery. He's asked, Scott, what do you think the long-term prospects are for the Vivek coalition of high IQ groups, upper class of whites, Asians, and maybe Jews with a conservative or at least anti-woke bent versus the low IQ, non-white underclass? Seems like the only winning path in a minority white world, in my opinion, but it looks more like the leadership class of the woke-tards at the moment. I've talked about this a little bit in the past on this topic of like how that would work. Is that it's not so much of an upper class push that Vivek is. It's a anti-woke, semi-anti-black way of approaching politics while being pro-immigrant. And that's an interesting way of seeing the coalition. It still it's not primarily upper class, because most of the upper class is still anti-white, worships blacks, and even these Asians who don't live around them and like worry about their grandparents getting attacked by them. They're still like talking about how they live in a white supremacist country, and they have a shared solidarity with blacks, and they're not about to support Vivek. Vivek is kind of more of a middle class immigrant ideology, where they feel that they won't get the benefits that are just owed to them because it's being reserved for blacks, and that their lives are going to be not as high quality as they should be. It's more of an ideology for the Indian business owner out in Ohio, or the Hispanic, mechanic who's rising up and starting his own small business. It's more of that ideology, and it's centered around, anti-wokeness, anti-diversity initiatives, and, strong on crime and stuff. But at the same time, it's incredibly pro-immigrant, because a lot of the people who make up that coalition are immigrants themselves. And some even whites will do this, because a lot of these whites hire immigrants, and they're like, I love how these immigrants work so hard. They're much better than these lazy Americans. And by lazy Americans, in their mind, they may think like just some good-for-nothing teenager who doesn't, know how to shake a hand or look you straight in the eye. But really, they mean blacks. It's very obvious by what they mean by this. And some of those people may move it into the elite sectors. I think some of the tech world is reflecting this. I think a lot of the people in the tech world like what Vivek is saying, and a lot of even the financial industry likes what Vivek is saying, because they really don't like this diversity initiatives. They don't like this. They know it's bad for business. They know it's pushing banks to lend risky loans that can't be paid, and that we had already witnessed what happened when they do this back with the Great Recession in 2008. So they don't want to repeat this, but they feel that they're held hostage by this ideology around them, and they want to push back against it. At the same time, they see immigrants as, cheap labor and good for the economy, while they don't see a lot of this pro-black stuff as good for the economy. So, at one hand, it's good, is that it's pushing back against a lot of the woke stuff that we generally care about, a lot of the race stuff, but at the same time, it's contributing to the demographic replacement of our country. So for that alone, I'm not that optimistic about it. I'm not even sure how much it will work either, because I don't know whether rural Americans still are going to be like, white Americans are still going to be upset about immigration. Immigration is like the most potent issue for a lot of people. They do not like the open border. They do not like, the free flow of refugees and asylum seekers coming and living off our land, and the hard labor of Americans. So it's ignoring that very potent issue to focus on other things. So I'm not that convinced on that point, but it will appeal to a lot of middle class and certain upper class immigrants and Americans in general. But I don't think it's the best way of framing it as like high IQ versus upper class versus low IQ underclass, because a lot of that upper class is still going to be very woke and very left wing, and that's not what Vivek is mostly appealing to. It's more the middle stratum of that, or certain sectors of it, the finance industry and a certain dissidents within the big tech industry who are into this. But the majority of people outside the financial industry, and maybe even some of the corporate world, the universities, the bureaucracy, the deep state, the military industrial complex will not be fans of this, and they'll still be favoring the low IQ underclass. But there is a creation of a new working class going on that doesn't even include a lot of the white working class. Like, even though these white guys who work like jobs that traditionally associate with the working class, plumbers, mechanics, that type of thing, they're making such higher income than the standard working class. And also, depending on their cultural attributes, they may be more reflecting the middle class. Well, some white working class are descending to that level of the underclass. And there is becoming this development of an underclass that is black, Hispanic, and also increasingly a lot of white people are descending into it. And it's centered around black culture. It's centered around a lot of black habits. It's like having single mothers at 18, having a lot of run-ins with the crime, smoking a lot of weed, having tons of tattoos, even with women, neck tattoos and stuff. And it's like becoming and all of them talk in Ebonics or AAVE, as they now say. And that's becoming the development of a new underclass culture. And even some of this is reflected in Trump. Trump supporters, like the new rappers who keep making these songs, like the anti Bud Light song and now the anti Target song. They're also showcasing that new underclass culture or new underclass development we have there. So some of those people may vote for Trump, but at the same time, that's most of them are not going to be voting for Trump. Is that most of them are going to be very left wing. And it's even with a lot of these whites who are descending that level, they're going to be extremely anti-racist because who they're dating, who they're associating with are all non-whites. And they're embracing non-white culture. And I think that deserves further inquiry into more of that underclass. But I always get a lot of people always talk about the working class or the multiracial working class. Well, the multiracial working class is imagined in conservative minds as these like upstanding citizens who have factory jobs or work in skilled blue collar labor, when in fact they're like raising families and they're religiously devout. And really the underclass is something very different. It's somebody getting like a neck tattoo and who like smokes weed every day and talks in Ebonics and works a dead-end job and like really hates racism and listens exclusively to rap. And that's really like a lot of the multiracial working class now. And it's not something that can be used for conservatism in the way that people think, because it's really more, I don't really like using the term multiracial working class, but it's more the multiracial lower middle class or middle class in general that is the conservative standard bearers, are the ones who are really being into a right-wing coalition. But the development, and that will include a lot of people who work in traditional blue-collar trades. But with the underclass, that's developing into something different. But a lot of these people still want to imagine that they're part of the working class and they're noble, upstanding citizens who are just victims of globalism, when really, in fact, they're just descending into a different form of life. And that's going to be developing more over time. And it's going to look more like ghetto culture, but it may be in the rural hinterlands. Hispanics will be demonstrating and whites will be demonstrating, and a lot of Asians won't, even though some Southeast Asians or recent immigrants sometimes also joined into that underclass. So that's something that is that's an interesting development more over time. But I don't know if I see the Vivek coalition as juxtaposing the upper class against them. It's something all their development. But it's an interesting question. I should write more about it. I do have we'll see what Vivek Ramaswamy's campaign looks like. I probably will, if he develops more, maybe if he hits double digits in polls, it'll be worth a second look. So that's it for that next question. Now we have two questions from New England Refugee. And New England Refugee's first question is, hey Scott, you said that you were into Age of Empires as a kid. What is your favorite real-time strategy game, and why do you think so many on the right wing love these kind of games? As a kid, I would say the Age of Empires game had a huge influence on me because they got me into ancient and medieval history. So I really liked those games. But in terms of playing, I probably liked medieval Total War and Rome Total War the most as like games, in terms of like what when I was like a teenager, of what I really liked playing. And probably what I would go back and play would be those games are their sequels where they like made them with better graphics and stuff. I'd probably go back and play those games. I really like the Total War games, probably, but the Age of Empires games had a bigger impact on me because I played those as a younger kid, and those got me into history, and I just was like playing them all the time. But in terms of like enjoyment level, I probably prefer the Total War games. I never really got into StarCraft or into some of the other games. I also there was Empire Earth that I played as a kid, but I didn't like that as much as the as Age of Empires. But going back in terms of like what I like playing and like really the game frame I really liked was Total War. I was just like the large battle scenes that you had, which you didn't really have with Age of Empires. Just like have a few people. Well, you'd have like armies of thousands like going up against each other, and you having to deploy strategy and stuff on the battlefield. which I always thought was really cool as a kid. But I haven't played a real time strategy game as an adult. Really, I think the last time I played it was like when I was like in high school. I don't really have the time. I like video games. I'm not an anti-video game person. Like, I'm not one of those people who's like put down the video games. Like, I actually envy people who have a lot of time to play video games. I was like, man, you really know how to manage your time. I don't have the time to play video games. If I did, I'd be like, damn, I have to set up a schedule. I have like other things to do. I read, walk, work out, whatever, go on hikes and stuff. But I'm not anti-game. I really enjoyed playing games when I was a kid and even into college. I'd probably rather play like a Super Nintendo game because you could just play those for like 30 minutes and then you go on. But like the new games, you really want to play, especially real-time strategy games. You want to invest like hours of your time into, and you're like, damn, I haven't taken a shower, I haven't eaten, and I'm like in my 30s, I can't be doing this anymore. So I'd probably say the Total War games are my favorite. Why do you think the right wing loves these kind of games? Well, they're based in heroism and traditional. They're free of. They're celebrating great history and great military battles and military history and all these types of things. And they're also very nerdy games. And a lot of people in right wing Twitter, it's just like a perfect combination. Like if you give kids like a history game and get them to like use their mind for it. And real-time strategy games are much more nerdier and require, I guess, a degree of sophistication. Sophistication might not be the right word, but it's very different from like first-person shooters like Call of Duty and like fighting games and Fortnite and stuff like that. It requires a different level of commitment and intellectual rigor, maybe you could say. And so they really, I think that's, I think a lot of right-wing people are really drawn to history, specifically, ancient and medieval history. And I think if somebody's young, really into history, that's a sign that they're more likely to be right wing. And a lot of people on distant right, they don't want to admit this, but they, it's okay to admit that they're a little bit nerdy, and these are games that are a lot nerdier than sports and first person shooters. And you can even say this, like the Crusader Kings games had a tremendous influence, and Hearts of Iron had, I think, some positive, some negative influence on the right wing and what people have decided to adopt as their political ideologies or even religion. The second question, well, it's not really a question. It's just a request for me to go after Ted Cruz because Ted Cruz, he's remarking about how pathetic he is. And Ted Cruz went after AOC for talking about how Democrats are the real racists. And he's like, the shameful, like some examples, that shameful filibuster was led by Democrats, your party. My party, the Republicans, proudly voted for the Civil Rights Act in much higher percentages than the racist Democrats. And he had a few more tweets along the lines, but it was really bad and really pathetic. But people just go with this stuff because, one, Republicans aren't immune from America's Afrolatry that is prevalent through every aspect of our life. So that's one. Two, there's this huge focus on just owning the libs, which some ways is good. Some ways it's like if you want to look at other things that could unify Republicans, just being anti-liberal is better than most. But a lot of times it's about like how can we own them and use like words and rhetoric that will put them into an odd position. And just saying that they're the real racists, even though people on Twitter will make fun of it, people still go to it. People still, revert back to it. They want to say like Biden hates black people or he hung out with segregationists. They still use this because a lot of this stuff is just like what can make an easy soundbite, can we turn into a political advertisement, and that's still a large focus of the right. And so that's why the Democrats are the real racists. Rhetoric has not died yet, unfortunately. So I would say that Ted Cruz is always about that. And even though people on Twitter will criticize this, the boomers and the Gen Xers who read conservative media still gobble this shit up. They're like, that's so true. And the party of slavery is still the Democrats, and people even will do that for like their criticism of reparations. Like, I support reparations, but the Democrats should support them because they were for the party of slavery, and that's just very cringe. It's not something we have to deal with. I think mocking it and making fun of it. It's actually really bad that he points out the Civil Rights Act because all the conservatives were complaining about Fox, following transgender guidelines at its office. I don't know if Ted Cruz, I don't think any of the elected lawmakers got into it, but all these people are complaining about it, and then they're like celebrating the Civil Rights Act passage. And it's like, what's responsible for that is the Civil Rights Act, and responsible for affirmative action. It's responsible for all these terrible things in our society. There's no reason to celebrate it. And that's probably the more concerning part, because it's like trying to celebrate something that was really bad and really hurt our country, and we still suffer from the effects of it, and they still expanded to make it even worse. And Ted Cruz is celebrating this huge gift to the left to make a tweet dunk on AOC. It's just really stupid. They need to focus on what's important, and getting Republicans to focus on what's important, and not descend into the cheap shots against Democrats just to get more likes and retweet and engagement is an important task. I mean, too much of what Republican politics centers around is getting Twitter engagement rather than advancing the ball or focusing on what's important to Americans right now. But that is it for this Highly Respected. Hopefully you enjoyed the holiday edition. We will be back next week with another tremendous episode, and we're going to have a great IQ supplement later this week, and at least one great Highly Respected column at highly-respected.substack.com. So be on the lookout for that. So until next time, stay respected.